Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name's Lauren Harrison from the TCCI. This session is being recorded, so we just ask that everyone please remain on mute. And if you've got any questions, place them in the chat box, or you may be able to ask them through the session, but they'll be recorded. At the end of the session, for more questions, we'll turn the recording off. And that way that the people that couldn't attend today will get the recording. And if you've got any questions and you want to wait till afterwards, that's fine. So I'll now hand over to Jonathan to introduce themselves.
G'day all. Thanks for being here today, and thanks for the opportunity to talk to you all about mental health and well-being in the workplace. So my name's Jonathan Bedloe. I'm here today representing Lifeline. I normally work for myself doing mental health first aid training, suicide prevention training, and increasingly other workplace culture conversations and the like. I've been working in the sector for 20 odd years in the community sector, did 7 years most recently with Neighbourhood Houses Tasmania, including a stint before the end as acting CEO. So over the years, got a bit of experience in the management space as well as obviously the mental health space. So look, I try to make my conversations as interactive as I can, and in that sense, happy to have questions thrown in the chat. I think with the number of people we've got, we don't want to open too many microphones at once. But yeah, throw some questions in the chat and feel free, Lauren, to interrupt me and throw them in there. And yeah, we'll make it as useful to you as we possibly can. Essentially, well, let's actually kick off. So I'll share my screen. And so hopefully you can see that now. So can somebody just give me a yes? Let me know you can see me.
Yeah, we can see.
Yeah, great, thanks. So yeah, firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're all meeting from around the state. Here in beautiful Lutruwita, Tasmania. Want to acknowledge ongoing custodianship of the land and Tasmanian Aboriginal people and their ongoing cultural and spiritual connection to our land, sea, air and community, and pay respects to any elders past and present, and anybody in the conversation who may be representatives of the Aboriginal community. So also, we normally like to acknowledge lived experience, and you know, in a group this size, there will be people who have their own lived experience of mental health challenges, or having supported and lived with people with mental health challenges. And so you come with a lot of experience and perspectives. And so again, feel free to share some of those. I'll try and get my chat open as well so I can keep an eye on those. But first of all, why should we care about mental health? Actually, before I go there, let's just say essentially what I'm going to talk through today is give you a little bit of background around mental health and well-being, a few stats and facts, a little bit of a model about how to have those conversations. Lifeline uses this model of recognise, respond and refer. And so I've sort of mapped out a bit of a presentation to fit with that model. And then we've got a few other components around how do we balance that challenge of having a mental health conversation as opposed to a performance conversation. How do we balance that tension as well? So yeah, first thing is, why care about mental health? Well, hopefully, first of all, because we care about each other and we're a supportive, caring community. I think particularly through COVID, we've learned that there's lots of benefits to be had by taking that approach, and we all do better when we all do well. So legally, we're also required to do it. Obviously, it's in the legislation, so it's always been in the work health and safety legislation and in the Act, but it's been more specifically identified in recent years that psychological safety has been sort of highlighted as an area that maybe we haven't responded to and provided as much support as we could have in the past. So that is very much getting flagged up currently as an area that we can do a bit more work on and improve on. And for many sectors and many industries, psychosocial safety is really much more of an issue than the physical safety. We've probably largely mitigated the risks from physical hazards and things, and we've got good processes around those, but that's not always quite the same in the mental health space. It also makes financial sense. There's a clear return on investment for every dollar spent. I don't know the actual figure off the top of my head, but it's definitely a good investment. Sorry, say that again.
I think we had an accidental unmute.
Yep, no worries. So yeah, there's a clear return on investment for the finances committed to improving mental health and well-being in the workplace. And it also helps with productivity. And so that's part of that financial decision as well, that we get a more productive workplace. People feel valued, they feel a part of something, work becomes more meaningful, and everybody does better as a result. All right. So we've got here a mental health continuum. This particular one's been put together by the Murdoch Children's Research Institute. And as such, it's kind of focused on the well-being end of a spectrum, I would say. We could, in a sense, stretch that out, particularly on the right-hand side, to being more than overwhelmed. We might start to get into a place where there's mental illness happening. In the coping, struggling phase, and certainly in the overwhelmed phase, that's where maybe there's some mental health challenges or mental health problems. But let's first of all acknowledge that, hopefully for most of us, most of the time, we have good mental health. And mental health as a concept is one that we aspire to. We can have good mental health. Sometimes we hear about people, or we hear people saying such and such has got mental health, and what we're meaning is that they're having some challenges or some problems. So let's actually frame it up that way. They're having some mental health problems and challenges, and that's okay. Many people do, most of us do at some point or another. But let's sort of protect that idea of mental health, that's a space that we aspire to and we can live in most of the time for most of us. All right, so with this, I'm wondering if there are questions or thoughts around what does it look like when you're coping? Love to hear from a couple of people, or maybe put some comments in the chat. How would you know when your buttons are starting to get pushed, or you're starting to move into a coping space or a struggling space? What does that look like? What are some of the things that might be going on for you when that's happening? I might actually just stop sharing for a moment and change my screen.
Hi, Jonathan. Joanne here. I think for me, the different mainly with coping, it's just to get through to the end point of the day. So complete the bare minimum, not that sense of achievement that you'd like to have. It's just, what do I absolutely have to do to get through, especially if I'm at work and, around people, what do I absolutely have to do to get to the end of the day? Right. And it's just that stripping everything down to that bare minimum to get through, and hopefully the next day looks different and looks more positive.
Great. So you're actually talking about taking action there. So acknowledging that you're stressed or struggling a bit, and you're talking about a way to actually cope by making decisions to change how the rest of your day looks. That's great. Yep. We've got a couple of other comments there around blood pressure rising. We're kind of going into survival mode, feeling hot and flustered. Absolutely. And when it comes to anxiety, anxiety, it's a normal response to situations that happen. We feel anxious, right? So let's acknowledge that there are going to be times most of us are going to experience anxiety, and that's a totally normal response. But sometimes when it goes on for a long period of time, it can get overwhelming, and so that's when it might start to become disordered. So when that's happening, anxiety can actually affect every part of our physical well-being. It affects our gastrointestinal system, so we feel nauseous, we feel queasy, butterflies in the tummy, that sort of thing. Our musculoskeletal systems, so we get aches and pains. Our blood system, so we have that rapid heartbeat and increased blood pressure, sweating, all of those sorts of things. And our thinking can be muddled as well. So every part of our being can actually be affected by anxiety. So, and most of the time, for a lot of us, that's just normal. That's dealing with the challenges that happen in life. Great. So, so what helps you at each of those stages? So if you're coping and struggling, what else? So you mentioned there, Joanne, about making decisions to change the shape of your day. What else? What other things do people do to cope or to manage?
I'm a lover of organisation. I'm a little bit obsessed with it. But if I'm thinking about it in a context, if I'm at work and I'm in that coping mentality, I will write myself a coping checklist.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at those 3 or 4 key points of what I need to do. I can tick them off and I know that I'm achieving to get through, like in that coping mentality. But some grounding exercises. I really like to do breathing and grounding.
Fantastic. Thanks, Joanne. Anybody else want to throw in a few comments? We've got some more chat things happening there. Personal care is important at the end of each day. Yep, that's great. Thanks, Dave. Great. All right, talking to a friend, obviously, social connection, offloading, downloading things to friends and colleagues in a healthy way, in the right way, not abusing those opportunities, obviously, but absolutely good things to do. Debrief, remove yourself, go for a walk, a bit of fresh air, some deep breathing may well be really fundamental and useful. Great. I'll just try and share my screen again. Okay. So I've provided a few little thoughts as well around using this framework, because I think it's quite useful that at different points along this journey, we might want to take some concrete actions. And when we're in a good space, let's use that to actually build some of those habits, build our resilience, build some healthy habits. And probably top of the list for me in that space is to build those strong social connections. Who are the 2 or 3 people in your life, not necessarily your partner, in fact, probably other than your partner, who you can talk to about the challenges in life. Because if we can share those things, I know my personal experiences, I find that incredibly beneficial. It can really shift my mental health. There's some other thoughts there around, if you're heading back into that coping phase, some things to intentionally build some of those health-giving habits. and don't wait for things to get worse, right? Let's take action now, sooner rather than later. The sooner we can start to take action, the quicker we're going to start to feel better, hopefully. And there's some more thoughts there. I'll move on, but I'm happy to share the slides afterwards if people want to be able to have a look at these. So when it comes to connecting with our team members or employees, volunteers possibly, there is no legal obligation for them to share the mental health challenges they might be coming up with or dealing with. So it's a challenge for us to maybe know about those things so that we can act on them. But I think this is where taking as many steps as we can as an organisation to create that healthy workplace, to get on the front foot and create a space where people do feel comfortable to share about the challenges in life, that's one of the critical things we can do in a proactive way. So if we can create the culture, create the space where people do feel able to share things, then they're going to feel more comfortable to disclose, and we're then in a better position to be able to provide that support that we hopefully want to provide. Any questions, comments, reflections about that before I move on? Okay. So how do we recognise? So using that model of recognise, recognise, respond and refer. For me, there's sort of three categories to look at, three ways to look at what's happening for people, three areas of things to notice. Changes in behaviour. So what are the things that the person's doing or that's happening to them? What are the changes in their thinking, and possibly with that, the language? What are the things that are saying that are maybe different from how they normally are? And then changes in their situation. So this idea of change, I think, is really useful for us as managers or as colleagues to think, I'm worried about this person. What are the changes that have happened that sort of give me license to actually have a conversation with them about the concerns I've got? So to draw that out a little bit, changes in behaviour might be withdrawing and isolating, okay? Pulling back from those connections in the workplace, or maybe tending to retreat to working from home more often, something like that. Changes in diet and exercise and social habits, and of course work performance. That might be the thing that we notice, is that somebody who's normally performs at a high level or at a certain level, over a few days or weeks, we might notice things changing, and with the awareness around other factors as well, that might be a bit of a flag to us as to what's happening and a reason to have a conversation. Changes in thinking and language. So words like, it doesn't matter anymore, who cares? Some of those sorts of phrases might lead us to being quite concerned. And in a sense, we might be worried about phrases like that leading to thoughts about suicide or concerns about suicide. Look, the short answer to that is, if that's a deep concern that we've got, then reach out, talk to somebody else, call Lifeline, get some advice on how to have that conversation. But it'd be great if we can have that conversation. Let's not ignore those signs. We probably don't have time in an hour here today to cover that, but welcome to have a chat about that offline or another time. And then changes in the situation. Mental health challenges for people are often about life events that happen and they get on top of us. Relationship challenges with the kids and their schooling or their behaviours, challenges at work. Maybe there's job losses coming, cuts in funding, retrenchments, all those sorts of things. Financial worries, even for people that are employed. You know, these days finances are a concern for a lot of people, and you know, that's good to be mindful of that as well as other health challenges and the like. So those three areas of change, you know, what's different from how the person usually is? That could be a real key for us to know someone's struggling. Any one of these things on their own, probably, you know, not a reason to have a conversation, but it's more when we get a few different things and we become aware of a few different changes or a few situations happening, maybe there is a need for a conversation. So what do you think about that little piece of information? Quite a concern in many ways that people feel challenged in having conversations about their mental health at work. Why do you think that might be? What sorts of things would get in the way for people, do you think? Feel free to come off mute, a couple of people, or put some messages in the chat. Judgment. So fear of judgment, fear of being labelled, possibly. The workplace culture, does the culture actually, you know, is it welcoming? Is it inclusive? Is it going to accept me and my mental health challenges? Self-acknowledgement. Yeah, it can be hard for us to admit that we're having some challenges at the time. Personal issues. Yeah, it's my stuff. It's nothing to do with my workplace. Fears of, you know, what's this going to mean for my career progression, or even, you know, in a more short-term fear, am I going to get isolated, excluded at work in some way? So, you know, really legitimate fears. Yeah. So let's acknowledge that those fears are there for people and they're very real and understandable. And again, if we've tried to set the culture, create the culture that welcomes people and includes people and gives people a sense of permission to share these things, that's going to be really good things we can do ahead of time. Yeah, they may not have the language or the confidence. And look, this is not just in workplaces. We know that in the community more broadly, about 50% of people who have mental health challenges don't actually seek help. And so many of the same barriers are there for them. Could be other barriers like finances, the cost of getting help. It could be getting access, you know, getting into doctors and psychologists and things is not always easy. So there are many barriers for people. Probably a key thing for us as managers, as people concerned about our employees and wanting to retain our employees, a simple question of why don't you want to seek help might be really valuable. We might be able to address some of those reasons. We can, even just acknowledging those fears and concerns that they have, can make people feel just that little bit better and feel a bit more able to share where they're at. All right. Any questions, more comments on that one before we go on? Right. So moving on, thinking about how we might respond. So I think the first thing before we respond is, are we in a good space? Are we going to be able to have that chat? Have we got the time and the space to have a proper chat, not just a fly-by-night incidental conversation? I think it's, you know, if we're going to engage in a mental health conversation with our colleagues or with our staff, we need to give that proper time. But then really just trying to give you some language around how we do this. And language and the communication we use is key. We want to try and own our concerns and move away from blaming and judgmental language. And we may not be intending to blame people or be judgmental, but the language we use can have that sense about it. So you're turning up to work late a lot recently. I'm wondering how you're going. It might be a fact, but that's not always necessarily easy to hear. It can feel a bit judgmental. Whereas if we change that to, hey, I've noticed you've been getting to work late a lot recently, and I'm worried how you're traveling. I'm concerned about you. Can you tell me what's happening? Hopefully you can hear a bit of a difference there in the language, that it's coming from us, coming out of our concern, and is less about you and the things you're doing. It's subtle, but potentially important in terms of being able to connect with people and have these conversations. So there's a couple more suggestions there. I've noticed and I'm concerned. Are those things happening? I've heard that you've been going through these challenges. Would you be willing to tell me a bit about that? I'm happy to listen. No worries, Debbie. Thanks for being here. I believe we're going to be recording, so you can pick up the rest of the session on the recording. What's happening for you? Simple question, sometimes a bit different from how you're feeling. Not necessarily anything wrong with how with asking that question, but it may not be about feelings. It might be about the situation, about the event. Yeah. And a couple more. How are you managing with that situation? Can you help me understand? What do you think would help? So, do you think people want advice when they're disclosing some of these challenges? No. There we go. There's the first response. That's my sense generally. I think people might ask for advice. What do you think I should do? That's fine. But typically when people start engaging in these conversations, they want to be heard rather than told what to do, or even given advice. So if we can frame things as, what do you think would help? How can I help? What are the things that we can do together to get you through this time? What are some reasonable adjustments that we can make to support you in this difficult time? Yeah. So, people, if they come up with some solutions, typically they're going to be relevant and meaningful to that person, and also something they're going to remember because they've come up with it themselves. So they're much more likely to be effective. And then if they can't come up with something, they're now more open to hearing your suggestions. So let's put them out as suggestions. Well, we could move to a more flexible working arrangement for the next few weeks. Why don't you maybe work from home 2 days a week instead of coming into the office every day? Or you could knock off at 3 o'clock instead of working right through till 5. Would that help? Suggestions like that. Great comment there. Thanks, Nicole. Yep. What if they don't want help? Good question. So we can't force people into taking help. Yeah. We can't determine people's decisions for them. They're adults. The only exception to this would be if they're in some form of crisis and there's a risk of harm to themselves or others. But for the moment, let's assume that's not the case. But if people don't want help, then really we need to let them know we're there, stay available, let them know we're willing to have the conversation and to help them find support in the future, and leave it at that, and maybe check in again a few days later or a week or two later. Try and keep that communication open, because if things change and they decide they do want help, knowing that you are willing and able to have that conversation is going to be really important to them. What about if they need more help than you can offer? I could understand that might be a bit of a fear for some people. You know, we're not mental health experts. We come with a limited set of skills, I mean, we've got lots of skills, but they're not in this particular space. That's okay. It's not your job to fix people. It's not your job to find the solutions. Just being there to have the conversation and be in that caring place where you can then refer them to other people, that's a great start, and that's a massive help to a lot of people. So don't feel like we need to have all the answers. We can work together with them to help work out where to next. So what if they are in crisis? Well, then we've got an emergency situation. If it's that much of a crisis, then, you know, all the usual numbers, 000, if there's a risk of danger to themselves or to yourself, it might be 000. It could also be that if you know, connecting with other professional help. So possibly your HR team, if you've got an organisation large enough to have an HR team. If you're a sole trader or something like that, or, you know, a very, very small team, then having a few numbers of people that you could call ahead of time, or investigating options ahead of time, is probably going to be important. You could call Lifeline themselves and actually ask, you know, what do I do? I've got somebody who's in crisis. Can you give me some answers or some ideas about how to best respond to this person? There's lots of phone lines out there. You know, give one or two of them a call and find out how they work and what they have to offer. Mostly they're more than happy to help in those sorts of conversations. Yeah, having signage around the office, letting people know about EAP, about employee assistance programs if you've got them available. Getting on the front foot with that information is also really important. So, mental health or performance management. Is this a bit of a question for some people in terms of how do we manage this space? Is that a concern for a few people? So for me, you know, both situations are valid, right? Yes, mental health conversations may need to be had and may be really important. And there is also a point at which a performance management conversation might also need to be important. So it's not necessarily one or the other, but being clear about which one we're having is important for you in your own mind, but also for the person you're wanting to talk to. So my suggestion is to start with a mental health conversation. If you've got reasons to be concerned about someone, start down that path of having a mental health conversation and be really clear that's what it's about. So maybe not doing it in the office where you would normally have those performance sort of manager employee type conversations. Maybe go and have a coffee, go for a walk, find a bit of a time and space away from the other team, and where we can kind of do away a little bit with that power dynamic that's in place between us as a manager and them as a worker. We want to try and meet each other eye to eye. Yeah. So be clear about what we're talking about. Hey, I've noticed these things recently, and I'm wondering how you're traveling. I'm concerned for you. I'd like to have a conversation to just check in with you properly about how you're traveling. This is not about performance. I'm just genuinely worried about how you're going. Something like that. Yep. So separate the two conversations. part of having that mental health conversation might include making some reasonable adjustments, making some decisions together about changes that might be made. Love to see in the chat any thoughts around what reasonable adjustments you think could be included in that. To get us started, maybe a few things might be about, the flexibility in the workplace. Is there scope to change the hours for a short period of time? Is it about changing the role for a while? If somebody's really stressed and struggling to deal with other people on the front line, maybe they need to take a back step for a few weeks and do some administrative work or do some other work that supports the team. Those might be some reasonable things. It's going to really depend, obviously, a lot on your workplace and what's possible, what's practical. And within all this, at the same time, I think we need to acknowledge that there might be an impact on other workers in the team. And so what may initially be a mental health conversation with an individual may well include some thoughts around the fact that it is having an impact on the broader team or on the productivity of the organisation. Again, not in a blaming or condemnatory way, but just naming it up. These are concerns we've got. You, as a manager or as a business owner, you're entitled to, be concerned about the overall business. That is your number one priority, probably. And you do have some rights as well as responsibilities in that space. So being clear about that communication. How you communicate your concerns is as important as what you communicate. And I think it's good as well if we can be open and upfront about those concerns. So, yeah, I'm worried about the impact this is having on the rest of the team. So can we come up with some agreements around what supports you need to manage these challenges you're dealing with, so we can minimise the effect on the rest of the team? It may be that we frame up, hey, I need to let you know that if these things don't change, if you're not able to find the supports that we've agreed you need, we might need to change some of the other things and impose some performance or have a performance-related conversation, because we still got the business to run. We've still got our clients we need to serve. I'll do my best to support you through this, but let's just name it up that might become a conversation we need to have in the future as well. Any thoughts, concerns, questions about those ideas? So one person said they were pretty keen to hear about that mental health versus performance management conversation. So yeah, was that useful? Any more questions you'd like to ask about that? Great. All right. So I've only got a few things to just talk to in terms of referral. So if you've got any other questions, maybe do just flag them up in the chat. So the slide I've got up here is about referrals. So, when we've recognised the challenges that a person's experiencing, and recognition includes acknowledgement with them, so they know we've recognised that as well. Oops, we just stepped back. Yep. And then we've had a conversation, so we're responding to people and letting them know, or having a conversation around what supports they might need. And then we move into referral. So what are the other supports that might be available? And look, this is not just about mental health supports, right? It's not all about psychologists and GPs. They are obviously really important and have their place. But, if somebody's going through financial difficulties, maybe a financial counsellor is just as valid. If somebody's having housing problems in these challenging times, then obviously that's going to need support. So maybe helping people connect with supports in that space as well. Same with drug and alcohol. A lot of people use drugs or alcohol as a way to cope. It's not actually the best way to cope, would be our thoughts, that actually alcohol and drugs tend to make mental health challenges worse. But, for some people in the moment, that's how they cope. So let's not condemn them for that, but just generally encourage them to look at alternative coping mechanisms as well. So here's a few services that you might be aware of. A Tasmanian Lifeline was set up during COVID and is run by Tasmanians with Tasmanian
For everything, aren't we?
social workers. Sorry, is that a question? No,
Lifeline,
all good.
COVID. Yeah. Was it always just been Lifeline itself?
So there's two. So there's the National Lifeline, the 131114 number, that's the crisis line. And a Tasmanian Lifeline, which is the 1800 number there, that was set up during COVID, and it's more for just supporting people when they're struggling. Yeah, when they're just going through some ups and downs. They don't necessarily need to call a crisis line. They just want someone to chat to talk through some challenges. So that's Tasmanian Lifeline. It runs from 8 in the morning to 8 in the evening. And the reports from that and the evaluations have been really great. So definitely want to recommend that one. Then there's the National Lifeline that you're probably all familiar with. EAP services, probably underutilised, I would suggest, in most organisations. It would be well worth, if you're in a large organisation, you've got an EAP, have a look at how many people are using it. So you're not going to find out who is using it, but find out how many sessions are being used, how much is it actually costing you. But then also try and get some feedback from staff. Is it actually effective? Do they find it useful? Because not all EAPs are necessarily what people are looking for. GPs, obviously, hopefully most of us have one, but not always easy to get into if you don't have a regular GP. There's some other practical things like WorkSafe Tasmania. They've got some great resources around how do we actually address psychosocial safety. So if that's a new thing for your business and you want to know more about that, Lifeline is developing some psychosocial safety training, which we'd be happy to share with you in the future. But WorkSafe have some good templates and documents to get you started. Access Mental Health is the state healthline or mental health helpline. And the Peacock Centre, you may be familiar with, has been around for a long time, but it's been updated, rebuilt in the last few years, and is now a very different model from how it used to be. It's a walk-in space where you're met initially by peer workers, so people with lived experience of mental health challenges. It's a very homely, warm environment. It's a non-clinical sort of setting. They have access to clinicians, but the first greeting is just by everyday people who've been through their own challenges. So that's 24/7. It's in North Hobart, and there are others being set up around the state. There's one in Lonnie, and I think there's another one soon in the Northwest. So we could talk about other services for referral and the like, till the cows come home, but that's probably a good start. Actually, one more I should flag up the top there, Find Help Tasmania. So you can search that website by issue, by the area of concern that you've got, as well as by location, and that will give you a pretty good comprehensive list of services available to meet those needs. Lastly, looking after ourselves. Yeah, we're no good to anybody else if we're not in a good space ourselves. So look after number one. Take the time you need to look after yourself. If you do find yourself having providing a lot of support to other people, even more important that we prioritize ourselves and give ourselves time to recoup, bounce back, get back into that good space of being on top of things and in a good space. So that's pretty much what I've got. More than happy to have any other questions raised. I might stop sharing the screen.